Hello and good morning and welcome to the Moreness culture. Good morning, Syl.
Yes, good morning, Beena. Good morning. Yes. Oh, I like that. Welcome to the Moreness culture. Or just
Yes.
welcome to Moreness culture, right? Not to the,
Welcome
just
to
welcome to
Moreness
Moreness
culture.
culture. I like that. Welcome
Yes.
to
Good morning,
Moreness culture.
Grain. Okay, finally, Grain has also joined us. And good morning to everyone who is watching us live here on in the group Sassy on Facebook and on Instagram and also on YouTube. So we are getting there, and soon it will be on TikTok also. You can watch us there too.
Yes.
So
Yes.
and
Yes.
also we are on Substacks too. So
Yeah.
these are the platform we are using now, and spreading out. This is what we are doing. Why now? Why not before? Why not earlier? A lot of reason. First, the first most important, appropriateness. Of course.
Yeah.
Second is
Always.
attunement.
Always.
Attunement. Okay,
Yeah.
yes. And also the third most important thing, uh, which I personally feel that still always try to pay attention to and try to follow. He always go a bit overboard in that he always try to be extra prepared before sharing anything.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
will not, he never share anything before that idea, perception, conception, perspective, any kind of sharing becomes innate to him,
Oh, it's owned, fully owned. Yes.
fully owned,
Yeah.
completely.
Yeah.
In other words, you can say that be really an expert on your subject, be an authority on your subject.
Correct.
And this
Correct.
is what he was doing. Although he was from the very, of course, well, at least that was my understanding from the very beginning, because this is the creation. He was creating all these things. So
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
else can be an authority? But still,
Yeah.
I learned with the time, as time was passing by, I was learning this that even though when you are creating something, when you have created something, the
Yeah.
practice, the practice is the key, because you create something, yes, you know that, you understand that,
Yes.
but
Yes.
communicating it so other can understand, it's a completely different thing. Understanding something eh, for yourself, by yourself, is a different deal,
Wow.
but understanding to this level so you can actually share and communicate with other people with different type of understanding, with different type of awareness. They're coming from different backgrounds, with different vocabularies, with different languages. It's a completely different ballgame now, and this is what he was practicing. After creating that, he spent a lot of time by practicing this, that how to communicate it. And this is the key for any learning for me. This is what my thought of the day to day is, that to be able to communicate it well. What
Mm.
are you doing? You need to be, and this is also the foundation of clarity of intent. You
Exactly.
might be expert in your mind. You might be very well aware of the idea, perception, conception, perspective in your mind, but to communicate it to a different person is a different deal, and you have to just okay practice different type of sharing. You have to practice and exercise a different vocabulary, and then you keep trying, and then you learn. During the process you learn that, okay, yes, now I'm communicating with, and every single person is a new person. They come completely different with completely different understanding, and this is what he has been doing. It's like doing a house job after spending 4 years in medical college, and then you have to do that again. That is kind of a process, because knowing is different, creating is different, communicating your thing is different. This is what mostly artists struggle with. They are wonderful artists, they know that, okay, what they are painting, but they don't know how to actually sell it, how to
Mm.
project their artwork. They
Yeah.
do struggle with this thing, and this is a completely different side. They, because we assume that okay, I'm an artist, I just paint things, or I just write poetry, I just write books and fiction, or I just
Wow.
design my dress. But to have an understanding of where to sell this, where to project my my artwork, how to. These are the other skills you have to learn. So being and doing always go together. You can be yourself, you can be completely an intuitive and artistic person. But when it comes to actually sell your product, sell your artwork or writings and projection and making a projection of it, it's a completely different deal. Then you have to come into the doing part of it and learn new skills, learn new technologies, learn new strategies of marketing. And they go together because right people need to see your artwork at the right place. You have to reach out to those people who you think that they will be interested in your artwork. And this is the kind of a thing I was just thinking. This is my business minded person side is that you cannot just think like, oh yes, I'm just in my field. You have to be practical also. That's why the practical implementation is the key of way of impeccability. It's a practical philosophy you created for your life,
Yes,
creating for your
yes,
life.
yes,
You are
yes.
going to create. This is the practical philosophy and the practical implementation of things and being really thorough about it. This is a completely different level, different dimension of creation. Creation and implementation needs to go together in balance. And this is what we are doing now. We are in the process of that. Yes, for some people, it's like, oh, you will never be prepared if you keep doing that, if you keep refining that. We are not refining the product or our creation. It is refining your communication skills, how to communicate your writing to other people, to appropriate people, audience.
Wow, wow.
Knowing your audience is also the key here. So, okay,
Yes,
that was my thought of the day, sir. I can keep
I love
going
it.
on and on
I
and
love
on
it.
for my own
Oh, you
understanding, but
continue as long as you like. It's always really very
no,
cool.
but we
Give
have
you
we
a
have an
quote here.
agenda. Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
before we start.
I can go, and I can talk about
I
this
know,
because
it's
I
beautiful.
love this.
You have a lot
But we
inside you. You have a lot to share. It's wonderful, Beena.
yes,
I
but
want to read you a
the
quote. Go ahead.
yes. No, no, please.
Oh, before we start, because what you were saying is very tied into what we're going to be reading. Yeah, so it's
Yes.
very cool. But here's the quote. Until we embrace the vulnerable essence of self-trust, we cannot fully know someone's intent or our own. And
Wow.
I added to that. I was asked to comment on this quote, so I added to it. Because self-trust critically depends on a foundation of self-honesty.
Exactly.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Exactly. Wonderful. Wonderful, sir. Wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. So, I like this idea though, the quote here, right? That we need to embrace the vulnerable essence of self-trust, the vulnerable essence of self-trust. And that's why people don't embrace self-honesty, because they don't want to deal with that vulnerability, because that's where the awful truth comes in. They don't want to face and deal with it. And the awful truth is that we are vulnerable. It's as simple as that.
Yes.
That's it. This is
Yes.
reality. You got to embrace it. You can't hide from this fact. So it's very
Yes.
key. That self-honesty, the self-honesty enables, right? Yeah, yeah. Let me just put that as a quote.
Yes.
Self-honesty enables self-trust. That sounds like a fine quote to me, yes?
Yes.
But that vulnerableness, that's very powerful. Yeah, yeah. We avoid the vulnerable. We avoid the vulnerable. And it's not good. Not good. You can't avoid things, people. Can't avoid things. Right, Beena? This does not work. Does not work.
We
Can't run
avoid
away.
vulnerability because we don't trust ourselves and we don't trust others.
Yeah.
This is very powerful, sir. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that quote is from the essence, the self. That the first quote I read, that's from Sher. But yeah, and she's focusing on that, and it's very powerful what she's focusing on. It's really really excellent. You know. Yeah.
Yes. The idea of vulnerability, again, being vulnerable is different, and the idea of being vulnerable is different. And mostly we have this idea that I am going to be vulnerable. This is the idea we have
Yeah.
because, and it remedies easily with with the peace of being.
Yeah. Very
Once
big deal.
you once you once you acquire that, or at least be on the path, then the idea of vulnerability actually just fades away. Yes, the vulnerability, being vulnerable is a different state, and it of course it depends on the context and situation and other things. But the idea of vulnerability fades away with the peace of being
Yeah. Yeah.
almost immediately, almost
Right.
immediately.
Right.
Because I don't feel vulnerable when I'm sharing things about myself, which might sound like
Yeah.
that. Okay, yeah, Peter, yeah, you were not impeccable in this thing. Yes, I was not. Okay, yes, you
Yeah.
were not being thorough. Yes, I was not. Okay, Beena, when you were doing that, it sounds like that it was coming from the ego side. Oh, yes, it was. I was not aware of it. So I've become an observant of myself. This is also a perks of one of the perks of peace of being, that you don't get attached to yourself and really hang up on that. And oh, I'm going to defend myself. No, if I see something, I'm also an observant like you. Oh, so you saw that? Okay, have you noticed that? Okay, now I'm going to work on this, but there is no ego attached to that. This is the peace of being. This is the state of being where I feel now mostly. I cannot say with surety 100%, but most of the time I am there where I don't feel any nonsense like, okay, oh yes, okay, what if somebody will be aware of it? So what? And that is something I feel that this is the difference also, where you feel and understand the difference between perspective and perception. That okay, what is the difference between that? Because you become an observant of yourself also, not only to
Yeah.
the outer self, outer than yourself, and the world in large, but about yourself. You see yourself also as an independent, and now you see, and with other person, like okay, if someone is observing you and they are telling you that okay, oh, I saw that, okay, yeah, it sounds like that it is coming from your ego side. Really? Okay, yes, let's go and see why, how. Okay, oh, this is coming from the primitive mindset. Okay, how, when? And then you start working on that, but you have to unhook yourself from that. If I am already in that puddle, how can I just save someone, myself from that? I need to get out of it, and that unhooking is a big deal. This is
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
all the big profound ideologies of the world were trying to explain it to me. The unhooking from myself, okay, become completely detachment, and that idea, sorry to say, nobody was able to communicate it well. They have that clarity in their mind, but they were sorry, they were not able to communicate it well. So coming back to this, the point I was making and trying to share in the beginning, that having this and the understanding of any concept or any idea in your mind is a different thing, but communicating it to different people coming from different backgrounds, different awareness with different vocabulary and languages is a completely different deal. Your job is not done till you become able to communicate it well to different people other than yourself.
Exactly. Exactly. To be an expert at it, as you say, or to use the old word to master it. I prefer to use the word to wizard it, but it doesn't quite have the
Yes.
same ring to it. Or to
So
mistress
the
it.
idea,
Not like master
exactly.
for the implications on it and hierarchy,
Yes.
but to
Yes.
be expert at it. This is very important. To be skilled at it. It's very
Yes.
important. It's very important. Wow.
Like
Thing is sitting
me,
very skew, yeah. Like it's
I'm coming every day
bothering
here.
me.
Absolutely, with absolute no idea what I'm going to say just in next second. I have never. When I
Oh,
say hello, good morning, Syl, even then I have no idea what I'm going to say. And I say, okay, my today's thought, and then things just start
no.
coming. It's
Right.
purely
But
100%
see,
organic.
right, to go back to Scher's quote, right? You've
Yeah,
embraced that vulnerability, which is at the essence of self-trust.
exactly.
You say,
Exactly.
okay, I'm at peace with it. I'm okay. I know I'm vulnerable, but so what?
Yes.
When we don't
And
have
of
a
course,
fear of the vulnerability, yeah.
I was making a bit, well, of course, I was making mistakes. I was doing that. It was not refined. It was a bit abrupt. It
Not
was
really.
sometimes
Not
not
really.
connected. And still it is happening. I know that. But
Wow.
I am trusting not only myself, but I'm also trusting other people who are listening, that they have
Oh,
an intent to understand and they will try their best to understand what I'm trying to share. This is the trust
interesting.
which gives me more of self trust. Because right now, if you are listening here, Sil, if Norma is listening, if Cher is listening, if Cheryl is here, and whoever, I trust your intent to goodness. Not only that, but also your
Exactly.
intent to hear me,
Yeah.
to capital H, hear me. And that trust on you give me more of my self-trust back to myself.
Yeah.
And okay, now I can trust myself because I am in a safe environment where people are going to try their best to hear me. And if it doesn't make any sense, they will tell me. They will share immediately. Beena, it doesn't make any sense.
Right. At least we hope
So
they'll say so.
yes, of course, but this is something I'm just saying that I'm open for that and I'm ready for that. That if
Exactly.
something is not
You're
going to make
open.
sense,
It's not
yes,
an issue.
they will say immediately, and it will be okay if they
Right.
if you will say still that Beena, no, it doesn't make any sense, and I will see and I will go back and check with you
Yeah.
why it doesn't make sense to you and why it was not
Exactly.
making
You'll
sense.
update.
Okay,
You'll update.
yes,
Precisely.
yes.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is the most energy efficient state of being so far for me, where I don't feel
Yeah.
any stress of making up things to hide. I know what I'm saying, but I'm
Right.
practicing how to communicate.
There's no need for it. It's inefficient. It's wasteful. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so let's get back to
Very
Musashi.
powerful, Bina. Very powerful.
Okay, just to give you a bit of idea that we
Yes.
have been
Yes.
reading Musashi, Book of Five Rings, or the Book of Five Rings, or Book of the Five Rings, I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
for me, it is Book of Five
Yeah.
Rings. And
Yeah.
this is, I asked Sil that I want to do practice the capital R reading of this book.
Yeah.
Okay, I heard about this, and when I started that, I was cautious but also excited. Why I was cautious? Because because of the Japanese warrior culture.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
it I was a bit cautious about that
Yeah.
because I don't want to indulge into that.
Yeah.
It's not like I cannot do, I can, but I don't want to indulge into this
Yeah.
warrior
Yeah.
mindset because, again, for me, the whole law of attraction thing is that if you present yourself to the universe as someone specific, universe just provide you the appropriate environment for that.
Yeah.
So if I will start putting myself as a warrior, universe will provide me a battlefield, which I don't want in my life.
Right. Right. Right.
So that's why I'm not doing that. That's why I'm very cautious of self conceptions also and titles for myself.
Right.
I'm a power learner. I'm learning, and this is I'm very absolutely comfortable with. Okay, so again, for me, the victim mindset and the warrior mindset, they both are the actually the two side of the same coin. You are a warrior or you are a victim. Okay. Uh, either it is going to be in that some point they are going to just be the same anyway. So to
Yeah.
the Musashi, we have been reading, and I
Yeah.
just want Sil to give us a short and a short summary of what we have been reading so far. But I'm saying and emphasizing on short.
All right. Well, what we read so far, we're going to go back a bit, Vina. I'm just
Yes.
scrolling through here. You see some of this is is actually, depicting Musashi art, and some of it is by him, actually. I don't know which ones are by him or not. But these are very much more simple. I think those were ones of him. But what we're skipping mainly is the introduction. Uh, you know, uh, Japan during the time of Musashi. And I'm deliberately skipping this because I don't want to be influenced and affected by it. And you'll see why. Um, this is by Musashi. Yeah, yeah. Right. And this is some of the um, a sword god. I forget what its name is in Japanese. We used to sell these in the store, by the way, Beena. This is a very famous one on a sword that he designed these, and some of them get very intricate, and people collect them. They're very expensive. Um, yeah, the words just on the tip of my tongue. So, Musashi also later in life, did art and calligraphy, and this this stuff is very treasured in Japan. It's a big deal. But again, I wanted to switch that, and to me, it's actually a five ring book if you think, because go means five, go in in
Mm.
Japanese. You see, so but anyway, who knows? Yeah, and so I don't know about the I just think book of five rings, not a. But maybe it's implied in the language. I don't know. I don't want to doubt this. All right, so we're just going to start here on the ground book. And this ties into what Beena is saying, right? And we're going to connect this. So the first one here starts as strategy, and I gave our session today the title of the way of strategy, and I think he even says this way of strategy, right? See, he has it there. And it doesn't have the S capitalized, and it's not hyphenated the way we do it in way of impeccability, but doesn't matter, right? And so what you were saying about being expert, and we're going to see this point come up in Musashi. So a little background on this. When I did my great reading project, which was reading all the classics, Musashi stood out somewhat, right? Most of them were vastly disappointing, and I don't know how many hundreds of books I had that was involved in this, but it's a little small library, but just of the classics, right? Multiple bookshelves. But I had one shelf which I kept the books that stood out, that I'd sort of, if there was a fire, I'd take with me. And it was one shelf, not very long shelf, 3 feet wide shelf, and it wasn't even full, right? No, like a dozen books. It's quite sad. Musashi was one of those that had a little bit more to it, but it stands out for another reason. But we'll come to that later. It led to a moment of mild frustration with Musashi. Like, come on, seriously, man, just. And that when I said that to myself, and in that moment, it was a big awareness for me, right? So, in an inadvertent way, it led to something, which is pretty cool. But we'll get there. I want to let this come about on organically, as we'll see. And the other point with Musashi is, so this was, I'm talking 40 years ago when I read Musashi. I don't remember anything about Musashi. When we read this, and Bean and I read some of it already. Now we're going to go over it again because we didn't get to finish. But I remember when we started reading this, I never remembered this phrase, way of strategy, associated with Musashi. I kind of don't specifically remember it. Just strategy is one of the key conceptions in our dictionaries of power, right? It's very important. And Musashi is going to lay out here why it's important, at least as best he can. He has a very interesting style, and we must keep in mind, that what we take for granted today, articulation. Yes, and even more, it's a little bit more rare, but even elucidation is common now. It was not so back then. The ability to express, when you read the classics, you see how it developed and actually went a little bit, it got lost. The Greeks were very expressive, they were very articulate. But then as the writings come later on, it sort of goes away for a while and then it makes a resurgence, right? And it's really interesting how this comes about, right? Because there's a way of thinking that's involved, and understanding of conceptions, etc. And so we see, even though Musashi is talking about concepts, he struggles a bit, and he struggles to express it in that overview perspective in the abstract. Furthermore, keep in mind, Musashi is not writing a book of strategy, not in the sense that we understand it to mean. Yes, like as life strategy, life learning. This is not a self-help book. He's writing this book for literal users of the sword, right? So keep that in mind, right? He's very literal in this, is very precise. He does bring in other things, as we're going to see in the beginning here, right? We see how he talks about other things, but we'll see later on. He's very specific and very detailed. Our task from a capital R reading point of view is going to be to extract the moreness, to extract, not find it, because finding assumes it's there. No, extract and create the value for ourselves from a understanding, awareness, self-improvement point of view. Yes. It's very,
Yes.
very important to be just keep this in mind, right? It's not the intent
Yes.
of this book, it's not self-help, right? Musashi would say, well, all right, I guess, but no, I'm writing this for sword duelists, fencers, as he would call them. All right, let's read here. You want to read, Beena? Or you want me to read?
No, I will read.
Okay, brilliant.
So far, my
Don't,
understanding of Musashi
yeah, yeah. I'm
is
just saying,
that,
just ignore the notes. Carry on. So
okay,
carry on.
okay. So, so far, the understanding of Musashi for me is that in that era, he was trying to share the goodness in his mind. That was the good thing. That was the noble
Correct.
thing. He
Correct.
was sharing all the noble gesture. Uh,
Yeah.
the medium he was using, so far the only objection is that from my side is that he didn't try to even reach out and see things other than being a warrior.
At least
He
not
didn't
in his
do it.
early life. In later life, he
Yes,
did, yes, but not
yes,
in his
yes.
early life.
So
Correct.
that's why I'm saying, okay, that was the early perception. That was the
Yeah.
only objection I had.
Ah,
That
his
uh,
early perception. Yeah. Yeah.
yes, yes. So that was the thing. And other than that, I if you see him in that context, that okay, yes, at that time where he was, when everyone was completely different to today's world, then it
Wow.
makes a whole lot of sense that why he was doing all these
Wow.
things.
Wow.
So, yes, okay.
Wow. Let me just check this here and see real quick. Uh, okay. You'll just have to wait.
Yes, I responded to that. Okay, that I can ship it to you
Okay.
if you want. So yes,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. But all right. Well, you can wait an hour or two. It's not the end of the world. So.
Yes, no problem. Okay, so let's start with Musashi. Do we have any titles for that? Like, okay,
This is just the ground book. That's it.
okay, the groundwork.
Yeah. Yeah.
Strategy is the
But
craft
that's
of
the
the
five
warrior.
rings, right? I mean,
Yes,
it's earth, fire, air, water, and void. Yeah.
yes,
Which made me
which is
think
very
about the
interesting.
five rings too. That I do believe the Olympic symbol is five rings, but I was just wondering, is it four or five rings? Anyway, I thought that's rather interesting.
Or seven?
No, the Olympic rings, it's five,
Okay,
but it
okay,
may be four. I'm just, can't
okay.
remember
The
now
strategy
exactly.
is the craft of the warrior. Commanders must enact the craft, and troopers should know this way. There is no warrior in the world today who really understands the way of strategy. There are various ways. There is the way of salvation by the law of Buddha, the way of Confucius governing the way of learning, the way of healing as a doctor, as a poet, teaching the way of waka, tea, archery, and many arts and skills. Each man practices as he feels inclined. It is said the
Right.
warrior,
So this is this. Let me
warriors,
just jump in here, Bina. This is
yes,
very cool. This is very cool that he's saying, right? That there is a different way for each. Now, it's important to extract the overview understanding here to say that it's not that you have to learn all of them. Any one way, when done fully and to its depths, will reveal all you need. Now, he doesn't say what it is that the end goal is. He doesn't even say that there is a need. But for us here as individuals, what we are looking for, of course, independence of being freedom and having fullness, being able to enjoy the totality of the self. That's a very powerful concept there. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Very good to know.
Okay.
Very good to know. But again,
Yes.
now, when we come back to way of impeccability, way of impeccability, what makes it so special is that when you're learning archery or the way of, right, waka, tea, all this stuff, right? Uh, doesn't matter. All of those, what's common between them is what's in way of impeccability, right? So way of impeccability is a toolbox for enabling us to traverse any path. Doesn't matter whether it's sword fighting or tea ceremony, archery, healing, doesn't matter, whatever it is, right? And that's what makes way of impeccability so powerful, because it's an abstract overview toolbox full of these tools that combine and everything. Can use them in any of those arts. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Having clarity of intent, whether you're an archer or dealing in tea ceremony, you're a doctor, you're a bureaucrat, as in Confucius, right? Confucianism is the way of bureaucracy. I mean, yes, they call it governing, but really it's bureaucracy. Yeah, it doesn't matter. See, having clarity of intent is useful there, and all the other tools. Yeah, very helpful. All right, please continue, Beena. Please continue.
Yes. Okay. It is said the warriors is the twofold way of pen and sword.
Now we have to
And
pause right there. I have to pause
yes,
that there, right? When it says it is said the warriors, and there's an
yes,
apostrophe there. In other words, by
yes,
implication, the warrior's way, yes,
yes.
is the twofold way of pen and sword. Now, this is very critical to understand here. Because in Musashi's understanding of Bushido, which is what he's talking about, that's the I wish the translator had included Bushido there and used the word Bushido rather than warrior's way. Yeah. And because this word has come to the West and it's known, but this was in 1974 that this was done. But this is the Bushido is the warrior's way. And Bushido is not only about fighting. Bushido is the code of the warrior. Yes, it applies to fighting, but Bushido is, in essence, it's kind of like what way of impeccability actually is. It tries to be. It's a code of living. It's a philosophy, but it applies to both pen and sword. Now, he's been very specific here, but in this understanding of Bushido, if you go into it from a cultural point of view, there is the understanding that if you are only adept at the skill of the sword, which is in essence the skill of being able to perpetrate violence, right? It makes you unbalanced. And they understood this. This was a very profound, very deliberate part of Bushido, that you needed to take up the pen, poetry, calligraphy, arts, right? Which is the pen now. All of those apply there. That you need this in order to be balanced. Otherwise, you get out of whack, right? So it's to have a cultural, again, we must pay attention to the lack of conceptuality of the time, right? That they had limited ways to express what they were doing. Yes, and this is part of way of impeccability, the language of conceptuality, which is the alternative name for way of impeccability. It enables the ability to conceptualize and express and communicate, to articulate and elucidate what they Musashi, for instance, here is struggling to express. Right. So this balance, we want to be more, in other words, right? You cannot just be either. He's saying both. And the sword here represents, from a way of impeccability point of view, the ability to be practical. Because if you're only concerned with a pen, you may be all into the arts and theory and you can't practice, you can't apply. That's not going to help you. But if you're overly focused in that, you lose overview perspective. You lose your morality, you lose your sensibility, you lose your sobriety, lose your humanity, yes, your heart. So it's very important, this very, very important, this balance, right, Beena?
Yes, yes, yes. Okay. It is said the warriors is the twofold way of pen and sword, and he should have a taste for both ways. Even if a man has no natural ability, he can be uh, a warrior, by sticking assiduously to both divisions of the way. Generally
Yeah.
speaking, the way of the warrior is resolute acceptance of death, although
Right.
not
Again, yeah,
only.
yeah, yeah. He says way of the warrior, right? Which is
Yes,
Bushido. Now, this way of the
yes.
warrior, right. This is in 74. This translation comes out. Yes. Right about that time, 1973, Carlos Castaneda brought out his third book, in which this way of the warrior gets really exemplified. And he uses the Don Juan, Carlos's teacher, in that book. Juan
Mm,
Matus is his name. Just known as Don Juan, that's what Carlos called him. But he brings this term, way of the warrior, and popularizes it, right? And in 73, Carlos was on the cover of Time magazine. So he was also a very big cultural influence. But look, this is coming out at the same time. Now, I don't know if this was the only, it was definitely not the only translation, but I don't know if this was the first one to really come. But around about that time, many books came over from the East, right? Starting with like in the 60s, a lot of that stuff got to be popular again. And not that it hadn't been around, like Herman Hesse's book Siddhartha, that was written in 1922 already, right? And it was got
mm,
the Nobel Prize. So there'd been an awareness of it. But then, of course, with the wars and post-war and all this other stuff, that got a resurgence in the 60s. And the stuff that started to become mainstream then. It wasn't necessarily so mainstream back earlier, right? Part of our culture now. So this way of the warrior is a big deal. It's very powerful. It's very influential. And of course, way of impeccability is part of this idea, because we also use that in there, but it's taking it further. Yes, taking it further, as we're going to see. As we're going to see, it's all about the abstract. So it's very nice to see all of these influences and the components, and how taking it further really makes a difference. Yeah. Now, this resolute acceptance of death. Not just an acceptance of death, but a resolute acceptance of death. There's a difference here. Yes. And the way of the warrior is resolute acceptance of death. Makes a difference. Yeah. You are dealing with death, with
yes,
determination, in other words, with completeness, with resolution, that deliberateness, in other words. This is very powerful. You can't be resolutely accept death if you don't have peace of being and
exactly.
independence of being. Correct. Very important. All right. Yeah.
Okay. The way of the warrior is resolute acceptance of death, although not only warriors, but priests, women, peasants, and
Peasants.
lowlier peasants and lowlier folks have been known to die readily in the cause of duty or out of shame. This is a different thing.
Right. Right.
The
Right.
warrior
So
is,
again, right. This
yeah,
look where it says lowlier folk. Yes. It's just
yes,
amazing, right? I mean, to him, it's just this. The hierarchy was not even questioned. It was not
yes,
only accepted, but it was pursued assiduously, as we will see. So I like that word assiduously, right?
yes,
And I've been a laughed a little bit there, just that ironicness or the amusement of the word sticking. Was just talking about swordplay. So, yeah, but
yes,
just this lowlier folk, right? I mean, priests, women, peasants, and lowlier folk. But in that time, I don't know if this is just Musashi's thing to include priests in it, but certainly women and peasants were absolutely not and lowlier folk, and such lowlier folk would be more accurate in the translation, right? Yeah, I
mm,
don't know if he has a particular prejudice against priests or if priests were just seen to be low status, but I doubt it generally, but maybe I don't know specifically. Yeah, yeah. Have been, he's saying that regular people, in other words, have been known to die readily in the cause of duty or out of shame. But this is not the same as a resolute acceptance of death. Now, let's hear what he says.
yes. Yes. Okay. This is a different thing. The warrior is different in that studying the way of a strategy is based on overcoming men by victory gained in crossing swords with individuals or in joining battle with large numbers. We can attain power and fame for ourselves or our Lord. This is the virtue of a strategy.
Right. So all of what we heard earlier, that was, oh, that's very cool. That's almost noble what he's saying. All of it just vanishes in this sentence here, right? These two sentences here.
Yes,
It all
yes,
vanishes. Now be clear that Musashi is an adherent proponent and practitioner of the superiority paradigm. Yes.
yes,
I mean, we could even call his way the way of superiority. Because look what he's saying here. We can attain power and fame for ourselves and our Lord. It's fascinating. Absolutely
yes,
fascinating. Yeah, it's so entrenched in him that he doesn't even question that it is appropriate to do this for somebody else. That's the system. That's what you're in. And I explained this when we were going through this with Beena. The samurai culture underneath has a lot going for it, right? This way of Bushido. But it's also very flawed. And why? Because they valued loyalty and obedience so profoundly. And they ended up being loyal and obedient to criminals. And it killed them. It absolutely killed them. They were forced to do things that were criminal and immoral, and they couldn't reconcile the two. On the one hand, to be a Bushido, to be a warrior, to be a real man, to be noble, to be wonderful, is to be obedient and dutiful. But but it's not saying you need to have that freedom to not do if your Lord is corrupt. That wasn't in there. Obedience was absolute. So of course, be a man's got to be the Lord's, and they made these samurai do all sorts of horrible things. It's terrible, and it completely killed that culture because it was corrupt. In other words, right? So the whole thing fell apart. It's very sad because there is a lot of moreness in Bushido, this way of the warrior, the samurai way, but it's
yes,
completely flawed, and we see here, wow. Not only that, that this attaining power or fame, this is seen as a duh. Look how he writes it here. It's just casually mentioned. It's not even, he's making a different point. Yes, he's not even saying that this is what's important. No, it's just like, well, duh. It's just taken for granted. It's very important to understand this. I mean, it's absolutely crucial because he says this is the virtue of strategy. Right now, strategy is not necessarily the most ideal term here, but really this is the virtue of this way of the warrior, right? So the strategy is to him a bigger concept than the way of the warrior, which is Bushido, which is more specifically, right, the technical side of things also. But Bushido involves also the culture, right? The culture of the warrior, right? So they actually talk about this. Yeah, I mean, just so the notes will give you all this more history on it, right? A lot of stuff in there. Uh, all right, Beena, please continue. Oh, sorry, I'm trying to get it to the top there, but I'm not. Yeah, doesn't want to go. Doesn't want to go.
okay. Okay. The way of a strategy. In China and Japan, practitioners of the way have been known as masters of strategy. Warriors must learn this way. Recently, there have been people getting on in the world of as strategists, but they are usually
Yeah.
just sword fencers. The attendants of Kashima Kashima Kantori shrines of the province Hitachi received instruction from the gods and made schools based on this teaching, traveling from country to country instructing men. This is the recent meaning of strategy. In olden times, strategy was listed among the 10 abilities and 7 art as a beneficial practice. It was certainly an art, But as a beneficial practice, it was not limited to sword fencing. The true value of sword fencing cannot be seen within the confines of sword fencing technique. If we look at the world, we see arts for sale. Men use equipment to sell their own selves. Men use equipment to sell their own selves. As if with the nut and the flower, the nut has become less than the flower. In this kind of way of strategy, both those teaching and those learning the way are concerned with coloring and showing off their technique, trying to, I'm not able to read that. Okay, now, trying to hasten the bloom of the flower. They speak of this dojo and that dojo. They are looking for profit. Someone once said, immature strategy is the curse of grief.
A
That was what he
cause,
said.
cause of grief.
Okay, the
Curse,
cause. Okay,
curse of grief
sorry.
is a
Yes,
good
sorry.
translation there. Curse of grief is probably a lot more accurate, but anyway.
Yes, it is not. So
uh,
yes, the cause
so
of grief.
again, I want to just comment here, right? Um, that where you paused, right? We said men
Yes,
use equipment to sell their own selves.
yes,
This is Musashi is in modern psychology, right? Not contemporary, but
yes.
modern, which is different. Musashi would be
Yes.
called a right brain thinker. Yeah,
Hmm.
and it's
Yes.
actually very obvious from his sword fighting and his biography. If you look at it from other things other than his own writing, it was very right brain. So things like that sort of pop out every now and then. And it's quite fascinating to watch for them. And this is the value of capital R reading. Because capital R reading, look what Beena did when she got to that. She read it again. She read it twice, right?
Yes.
Because it grabbed her. It's like, whoa, whoa, what are you saying here? This is very profound. Men use
Yeah.
equipment to sell their own selves. Yes. And this it's not just equipment. There's many ways they sell their own selves. But this idea of selling your own self is, selling out in modern language, right? It's a very
Yes.
profound point, just dropping in there in the middle of nowhere, right? Now,
Yes.
in olden times, strategy was listed among the 10 abilities and 7 arts as a beneficial practice. Now keep in mind, Musashi is, he's a couple of centuries old. I don't remember now. I want to look it up here real quick because it is important. Uh, let's see. Yeah, 1584, right? So this is it's a very interesting time in the world too, right? Because this is the time of when stuff, when he was born in that era, but where the world started to expand, right? Like they rounded the Cape and Europe was connected to India via the sea and stuff like that, right? And during that time, a little bit later, I don't know if it happened during, yeah, see, 1573, this just Japan was a lot of revolution and all that time. A lot of stuff happened, right? So it was a time of great cultural upheaval throughout everything, right? And I don't know when the first Westerners came to Japan, but it may have been during his lifetime. But certainly, word would have come from it elsewhere. Anyhow, so it was a great period of great upheaval and change happening. I mean, Japan had undergone major civil wars and reorganization, so a lot of stuff going on. But what I want to point out here, where we were, just get back there, is that he's talking about in ancient times, right? This way, what did he call it here now? Did I go past? Yeah, here we go. The 10 abilities and 7 arts. And I was telling Beena about this, right? This word way is a way old word, pun intended. Okay? A way old concept. And it comes from Taoism. Yes, which that's what it means, Taoist way. Yeah, and I saw earlier today, that the book's name, Tao Te Ching, is translated as the way of virtue. I never knew that. I like that book. It was also on my shelf. It was a very cool book by Lao Tzu. And but still, I just knew it as wayism, really. Taoism, wayism, Tao way, right? And didn't remember it being called the way of strategy back then. But anyway, sorry, the way of virtue, not way of strategy, way of virtue. But Taoism is a huge force in Japan, right? It's right up there with Confucianism. It's very powerful influence, and anybody studying more, doing more, like in Japan, right? Their classics, like in the West, you'd read Homer and stuff like that, Socrates and so on. But in the East, you'd read Lao Tzu and Sun Tzu, yes, which is Sun Tzu's The Art of War, yeah. And when we understand this, we're saying that this stuff has been around, right? And he's taking it a little bit further and going more precise into it. So this way of strategy is the old way, and Sun Tzu is all about strategy, correct? I mean, when you read that book, you'll see it's all about strategy. No, I mean, it's the
Yes.
art of war. But he says, if the ultimate war artist, which you see this comes in sort of more modern Chinese stories. They call them war artists, but it's a term going way back, right, from Art of War. The ultimate war artist would be one who would win his battle without the use of force, through pure strategy alone. Yeah, so the strategy point is a very deep one. It's a very big deal. And Sun Tzu is still around today, The Art of War. It's a very, very big book. And it would have had a big influence, or at least Musashi would have been aware of it, right? So we understand this. He's going very particular into the individual rather than the overall, but still powerful. Right. Please continue,
Yes.
Beena.
In olden times, strategy was listed among the 10 abilities and 7 arts as a beneficial practice. It was certainly an art, but as a beneficial practice, it was not limited to sword fencing.
Right.
The true value of sword fencing cannot be seen within the confines of sword fencing technique.
Where we got to stop.
If we look at the yes,
Right. And what I was saying earlier,
yes,
Musashi is a clumsy writer. Sorry, Musashi, but it's true. Yes, you may have been a really proficient and expert swordsperson, but you are not a great writer. His thoughts don't flow smoothly. He just pops these things out like this, right? I mean, this needs to be really emphasized. The true value of sword fencing cannot be seen within the confines of sword fencing technique. He's telling you, think in the abstract, zoom out, look, take more, extract, but he doesn't have the language for it, right? And the writing
yes.
skills. Okay. Please
If we
continue, Mina.
look at the yes, if we look at the world, we see arts for sale. Oh, okay. Man use equipment to sell their own selves, as if with the nut and the flower, the nut has become less than the flower. In this kind of way of strategy, both those teaching and those learning the way are concerned with coloring and showing off their technique, trying to hasten the bloom of the flower. They speak of this dojo and that dojo. They are looking for profit. Someone once said, immature strategy is the cause of grief. That was a true saying. There are 4 ways in which men pass through life as gentlemen, farmers, artisans, and merchants.
All
The
right,
way
let's
of the
stop here
farmer.
real quick, Bina.
Yes.
I've been
Yes.
meaning to comment on this, but here we see there are 4 ways. Not so. This really is different in the pronunciation of the sentence here, the expression of it, right? Uh, the enunciation, to be precise. There are
Hmm.
4 ways in which men pass through life. Not there are 4 ways in which men pass through life. Different meaning. In other words, there aren't 4 types of style of going through life. There are 4 ways, 4 parts, 4 Taos, right? He's using way as the word Tao, and it's likely related to this concept Tao of a way. It's capitalized, see? So it's very important to understand this, right? Because when we say 4 ways, little w, it means very different thing to 4 to with a capital W, right?
Yes.
Makes sense, Beena?
Yes.
All right. It's
Yes.
just important here. I'm just mentioning this. We are used to using capitalization. We do this part of Way of Impeccability, part of your Dictionary of Power, is to use this importantly. And that's why, for instance, when he says way of strategy in Way of Impeccability, you'd write it as a concept with it hyphenated and strategy also capitalized. So it's a thing like he's using way here, right? Way of strategy becomes a thing. It's more important. But in his language, though, they were way, the capital W way of strategy. That's why it's little w. And a warrior was also little w, right? He didn't take it all the
Yes.
way. But look, 10 abilities. You see, the 10 abilities is, it's not just saying there are 10 abilities. It's a thing. It's known when you talk in language. Oh, the 10 abilities. People know exactly what you're talking to in his time. And the 7 arts, right? It's exactly mentioned. I don't know. All right. Please continue, Beena.
Yes. Okay. The way of the farmer. Using agricultural instruments, he sees springs through to autumns with an eye on the change of season.
Changes of season. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yes. Second is the way of the merchant. The winemaker obtains his ingredients and puts them to use to make his living. The way of the merchant is always to live by taking profit. This is the way of the merchant. Thirdly, the gentleman warrior, carrying the weaponry of his way. The way of the warrior is to master the virtue of his weapons. If a gentleman dislikes strategy, he will not appreciate the benefit of weaponry. So must he not have a little taste for this?
Oh. All right.
Oh.
There's a bit of history here.
Hmm.
Again, Musashi, like I said, is some of a poor writer. Yeah, and he doesn't fully articulate his concepts, but also he's writing within a cultural milieu. And it's very important to understand this. He's taking a little dig at, I used to call them highway surfers, right? Guys who drive around in their cars with the roof racks and they put surfboards on the cars and they never went surfing, but they just wanted to look cool and be seen as surfers. And, well, the girls like surfers, this kind of nonsense, right? Uh, so I call them highway surfers, right? Well, the gentleman warrior
Yes.
is the highway surfer of his day. Yes. Somebody who,
Oh.
yes, they're into the poetry and the calligraphy, but it's all, and I'm a warrior and they walk around with a sword, but they're not actual swordsmen, and they get, in a real fight, they just disappear in an instant and get killed really quickly, right? So it's it's a pretense. And he's taking a bit of a dig here at those, right? At these highway warriors, as it were, right? Just gentleman warriors, right? If a gentleman dislikes strategy, and when he means strategy, he means the actual application of sword techniques and fighting. Yes. If a gentleman dislikes strategy, he will not appreciate the benefit of weaponry. So must he not have a little taste for this? Little question there. It's a little dig to say, dude, if you're going to carry a sword, you got to know what it means, what it does, what it's about. Otherwise, what's the point? You're just full of BS, but he doesn't want to say this, right? Because this was a fairly large contingent. It was quite common, yes. As we'll see later on, those that were seriously into swordplay were a very small minority. Yeah, because of course it's a dangerous business, right? So there's some appropriateness involved here. All right. Anyway, so I just like that little dig there at these gentlemen warriors, right? The BSs, in other words, right? Pretenders. Yeah. Hmm. Fun stuff.
Yes. Okay.
Fun stuff.
Yes. Fourthly, the way of the artisan, the way of the carpenter, is to become proficient in the use of his tools. First, to lay his plans with a true measure, and then perform his work according to plan. when he passes through life, these are the four ways of gentlemen: the farmer, the artisan, and the merchant. I have a question, sir. When
Yeah.
he says the merchant, so he was saying that, okay, they always just look for their profit.
No, but
Yes?
that's certainly the conception of merchant. But and I would say in general that's probably true, but not in the necessarily so. Many sell things because they have to, because it gives them joy. I mean, take the people who open up restaurants, because they love cooking and all this. They're not necessarily doing it for profit. They're doing it for the love of creating nice and beautiful food and art. And many of those, of course, aren't successful in business because they aren't focused on the business. But there are some who manage to balance both. Yeah. So yes, and then of course in our modern times we have the B Corp, the benefit corporation, right? So it's not necessarily true, but it is certainly generally in the vast majority of cases that is the case. Yeah. And that
Mhm.
last sentence, right? These are the four ways of, and then it's the it should be a comma after of, right? These are the four ways of the gentleman, the farmer, the artisan, and the merchant. See, it reads differently when you read it as the four ways of the gentleman, the farmer. Then there's only three ways, right? So this, the gentleman warrior. It's again poor translating, poor thing. That should, or maybe he wrote it that way, but you see, he drops the warrior part here because
Hmm.
that's a gentleman in those times would walk around with swords, yeah, even though he wasn't a warrior. That's why earlier he calls him the gentleman warrior, and then he just leaves off the warrior part.
Okay, but
Well.
let me finish my question because I was
Oh, sorry.
asking
Oh, I
something
thought you had
else.
asked already. Oh, sorry, sorry, sorry.
No, I was
Sorry.
saying that, okay, he mentioned that the merchant is focused on generating profit, or like, okay, having profit in everything and every transaction or whatever he is doing. But
Yeah.
so the carpenter and so the farmer.
Exactly, exactly. They all do it for profit. Exactly. Yeah.
Like he's just focusing on carpenter as just like, okay, he is just doing these things and
Yeah.
not making living out of
Yes.
it.
Yes. Yes. And this, we see this as a flaw in Musashi's thinking. He does not have this ability to abstract and see the commonality. And we're going to see this very much later on in the work as well. Right? So be aware that Musashi, he's grasping things, but it's nascent. It's early times. This is the burgeoning of this way of thinking back into culture. The Greeks had some of it, yes, and they had where those schools of theirs, right? Schools of
Mm.
thought and the forums, and when they hang out, at least the elite in the Greeks, not all the Greeks, at least the elite, right? Uh, they were through sharing this and collaborating on these things, they developed this mindset of thinking differently, and that's what makes them stand out. That's why they were so exceptional. And like I say, the Romans had some of it, but then over time with the Romans it got lost again, got consumed by the superiority paradigm, um, and other more worldly stuff. But this is very important to realize that we need to pay attention to the fact that we tend to assume because somebody's saying something that their thinking is as sophisticated as ours. It's not. We have evolved as a species, right? And we are still evolving, right? But it certainly was not that common or easy. So he struggles a bit. He struggles to express himself. It's very powerful. So yes, you're right, Bina. When we abstract this and look at the commonality, and also the gentleman warrior, he had to make a living in some way, right? So
Exactly.
yeah,
But I guess the what we read before, they were saying that they were actually adopted by the schools and in some way by the state, and the state was taking care of them, or maybe no, there was
no,
another
no,
word.
no,
No, no,
no.
no.
Those
The other
dojos were
word,
independently run by the lord, the dojo, the
the
daimyo.
lords. Yes, the
Yeah, yeah,
lords.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So they
But
were
not,
they were
yeah. I don't know if you're adopted into it, potentially, but you would sign up. So the other point is that the warrior, samurai, you were an employee. That's it. You were
exactly.
contracted, and they did change houses, not that often, but they did, right? You were an employee of this daimyo, yes. And so mostly they were
Yes.
born into it, yes, and you were part of the greater clan and all this, but still, you were still an employee. Yeah, because you had the Ronin, which is a masterless samurai, the free agents, in other words, right? So it's all about, doesn't matter where you are, it's all about profit in some way. But we don't think of profit from our labor as profit. It's flawed thinking. Yes. I mean, to think of the carpenter as being in it for profit, of course he is. Yes. But he's not just making a profit on his labor only, he's also making a profit on the materials, right? So yeah, it's a flaw in the thinking. Quite right, Beena.
Yes. Comparing the way of the carpenter to strategy. This comparison with the carpentry is through the connection with the houses of the nobility, houses of warriors, the four houses.
Okay, one second here, right? Let's just understand carpenter again too, which means really more like, I guess today we would say a broader term for this. mm, uh, I don't know. Artisan probably. Well, he separates armor. Yeah, artisan is a better term than carpenter. He does say it earlier. Yeah, he says gentleman, farmer, artisan, and merchant. But in those days, when you build a house, because it's built out of wood, uh, you hire a carpenter. Or today we'd call it construction, and many more involved than just carpentry. But a bricklayer would fall under this, or somebody who's working with power tools, like a jackhammer operator. They're all falling under the same thing. But a carpenter is closer more to the architect, because he's talking about plans and all of this, right? So he's not talking about the labor part of it. He's talking about the thinking part. So an artisan really is a better word here. But all right, just to be aware that carpentry is an older term. Today that's been extended more and it's gotten more specialized. But in those days, and even in medieval times, right, you think of a contractor as a carpenter. Anyhow.
Okay. So, sorry, I was just checking that. Okay, we drop our live on Instagram. So
Oh,
I'm just
oh.
disconnecting again. Yes.
Oh, no. The reason why is because it's been an hour. That's why. It only runs for an hour.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, I either
Okay.
have
That's
to
all good.
start another one, which I could do,
No
but
problem.
I'll leave it there. It's fine. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. We go back. Yeah. Come on now. My Zoom things are in the way. Okay. So I can see 4 messages. Here we go. All right. Please keep going.
Okay. The comparison with carpentry is through the connection with houses of the nobility, houses of warriors, the four houses, ruins of houses, thriving of houses, the style of the house, the tradition of the house, and the name of the house. The carpenter uses a master plan of the building, and the way of strategy is similar in that there is a plan of campaign. If you want to learn the craft of war, ponder over this book. The teacher is as a needle, the disciple is as thread. You must practice constantly.
Okay. So a couple of important points here to go back to all of this of the houses. Something again, we need to look at things in context. Context is one of those profound conceptions in the dictionary of power that we have to understand. When we talk about a carpenter today, or even an architect or a builder, and they build a house, we think of it in purely physical terms, right? In purely construction terms. Fine, the architect makes a plan, he makes it look pretty, maybe, or whatever, but okay, in general, it's utilitarian. Yes, building a house
Yes,
is a utilitarian issue. There's a little bit of aesthetics involved in the design, but well, typically we can't afford to build houses the way we'd like them to look. So in general, you're building a house and that's it. It looks pretty much like most other houses. Okay. Now, we look at here now, right? When he says houses of the nobility, houses of warriors, the four houses. I don't know. This is a specific reference, and this may be like bathhouses and tea houses, brothels maybe could be in there, and some other house like that, right? And that, I think that's what this is referring to, if I understand it correctly. I'm not exactly sure which four houses those are. Maybe like theater would be one of those houses, but I suspect, it's things like the bathhouse and the tea house and the theater house or whatever, right? The house, right? Anyway, so but then look, the carpenter is also about the ruin of houses. So if you want to go and siege, because when you talk about houses, this could include a castle. If you want to go and siege these houses because they built this like a castle, right? We're talking about houses here. We're talking about castles to a large extent, many times. So ruin
Yes.
is like, wow, okay, well, you're gonna go and consult the architect, or you're gonna consult the carpenter, right? Because in this case, carpenter is both architect and contractor. Yeah, thriving of houses, the style of the house, the tradition of the house, and the name of the house. So when you building a house in Japan, and well, in the East in general, as I understand it, China, Korea, Japan, right? This house is a bigger concept than just simply a building. Yes, it is as much more to it. Yes. And that's why in the West, you've got, like when Game of Thrones, right? You've got this house and that house. Yeah, because it goes around the building and trenches and embodies and exemplifies much of the moreness, right, is involved, the abstract understanding of what is involved when you say the house of, right? I mean, we take it to mean the family, the clan, but the house of has a very literal origin, and Musashi here is exemplifying the literalness of where this term originates from. Yeah, it's very cool, right, Beena?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So again, we need to really look at things in context. Yeah, understand a little bit more, and because we much has been diluted and lost in time. But when we go back into the origins of stuff, it opens our eyes, right? Now, of course, in Japan, this is still a big deal. Right? Look at Feng Shui, right? I mean, Feng Shui is not just something that people use in their own homes. Corporations employ this. It is a huge deal. Like how your lobby of your big skyscraper is set up, right? It all needs to be done exactly right. I mean, they hire experts in this. It's a very big deal. It's a huge deal. So, and that is because your house must be in order. It's a literal thing, not just figurative. A house being in order doesn't mean that, yes, you've got no dissension and people aren't arguing and fighting and it's not untidy. It means it's arranged appropriately to deal with energy. Yeah, see?
Yes.
Have your house in
Yes.
order takes on a whole other meaning now. Isn't that fascinating, Bina?
Yes.
I love this. Very cool
Uh,
stuff. That's what Bina was saying earlier. When we read this, yes, or at least in our capital are reading, because of my background and my studies and understanding all the stuff, I'm able to provide this greater cultural context, and it's huge. It's very useful. Now I'm providing it in the context of not specifically being an expert in Japanese culture, because I'm not. I have a good understanding, at least from samurai culture, but I understand ancient culture in general. Yes. And I understand the origin of conceptions. This I am expert in. So when I take this concept of this word house and you go back to it and you see how you can put it all together, see, and I'm able to provide that moreness, that elucidation.
yes.
It's
Yes.
very
Yes.
cool, though.
Yes.
I mean, I really like it. And it's very cool. And also, we'll see later with more culturally specific things, as Bina was referencing. It's very helpful. It's very
Yes.
helpful to our understanding. Yes, right, Bina?
Exactly. Yes. It is very helpful because some of the books, like in this case, Musashi's book of Five Ring, this is something I would feel that not satisfied because the way he is writing, the way he is
Yeah.
sharing, I can
Yeah.
see the intent to goodness very obvious here that he was trying to
Correct.
share. He was
Correct.
trying to share
Correct.
the abstract conceptuality
Correct.
also. He was
Correct.
trying to share the profoundness of of the life at that time. But
Wow.
how well he was communicating is a different deal. I had no idea that it is going to be also an example, and of course, in Musashi's words also, like using an analogy of artist. It was just completely intuitive. I had no idea. I was just sharing that making an art is a
Oh,
different thing, but projecting your art is a completely different thing. Communication,
oh.
as Syl was always loved to say, that communication is a haphazard business, but communication
Yes,
is also the most crucial business you need to learn. This is the most crucial skill. It's like surfing. You have to follow the attunement and all practice all sort of conception and ideas into that. Is from way of impeccability, especially because
exactly.
understanding is a different deal. Having an understanding and awareness is a different deal. How you communicate your understanding and awareness is a different deal. And I'm not saying that, and I'm not limiting the
Entirely,
communication. Yes,
entirely. The skill
entirely
of
different.
communication is an independent skill, and
Exactly.
many
And
do
by
not realize this. Yes,
yes, and by communicating, I'm not limiting it to our verbal communication only. We
correct.
communicate with our way of being. We communicate by practicing. We communicate
Yes,
via our art and skills. So
yes,
everything comes into the communication and communicating.
yes.
So
We
when
communicate
it
with our
is
being. Yes.
exactly, exactly. So
Yeah.
this is something we need to pay attention because communication is a big word, big
Oh yeah.
word, and
Oh yeah.
we need to understand the vastness of this word, this concept, communication, because mostly, unfortunately, we assume it and keep it limited to verbal communication only,
Correct. Correct. And
which is
also,
not true.
we undervalue communication. Musashi has a lot of value, but his communication skills are relatively poor.
Yes,
No.
yes,
It's two different skills, and
absolutely.
Musashi did not appreciate the because he would have put it in. He would have mentioned it specifically, and it really needs to be mentioned that you can have all of these skills, the way of this, the way of that, but the way of communication is a separate way, and it's one that links all of them. Right? If you don't have the way to
Yes,
express, then you're losing much of your own value, not as a communication tool, but for yourself. Now, there's a bit of an oxymoron here. You say, well, why would I need to learn the way of communication if I'm not looking to actually communicate with others? Your intent is not to change or have the transmission of your ideas and understandings. The idea of the way of communication is to have the ability to do so. Because if you are able to do so, it means that you have to be really expert because you have to adapt, conform, and make appropriate what you are expressing, what you are communicating in order to resonate with somebody else, which means you have to have an understanding of their psychology, you have to understanding of language, understanding of expression. You have to really, really know your subject to be expert at communication. And when you do that, who benefits? You, right? So to follow the way of communication is not about changing others, but about consolidating your own expertise. Yes?
yes, yes, exactly. And
Yeah.
as we were saying something about communicating our way of being and our beingness. Uh,
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure that other people will understand with this or will agree with this or not. But for me to see the example of communicating the beingness or a specific way of being, a very good example is Marilyn Monroe.
Yes.
She was
Yes.
able to communicate a very specific way of being, her beingness.
Correct. Correct.
She was, whenever she was not into, she's and it was very obvious when she's communicating, when
Yeah.
she's not communicating it.
Yeah.
We can see that. Of
Yeah.
course, a lot of other actors also do that, but she was really an expert into that.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
was like really an immediate thing. You can see that how skilled she was
Yeah.
in communicating her beingness.
Yeah. Yeah.
She was
Turning
very
it on
skilled
and
into
turning it
it.
off. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, this
Yes.
point here, right? I don't remember this specifically from Musashi, but it's very important. You must practice constantly.
Yes.
In way of
Yes.
impeccability, it's capital P practice because there's a moreness to it, right? He doesn't
Yes.
elaborate on this. But when we understand the skill, the concept of practice, and the skill involved of actual practice itself, not of practicing whatever your thing is, whether it be painting or bricklaying or sword fencing. No, practice itself. There's some moreness to it. And when you understand that, it changes your life. It's a really big deal. But he's just saying without practice, well, it's all meaningless. It's another way of saying you must practice constantly. Yes?
Yes.
No.
Like the foreman, carpenter, the commander must know natural rules and the rules of the country and the rules of the houses. This is the way of the foreman. The foreman carpenter must know the architectural theory of towers and temples and the plans of places, and must employ,
Palaces.
palaces, plans of palaces, and must employ men to raise up houses. The way of the foreman carpenter is the same as the way of commander of a warrior house.
Yeah. Yeah. So see, now he said the way of the carpenter, but really he meant the way of the foreman carpenter, which is different, right? The overseer, the general contractor, not the, well, nowadays the foremans would be the guys who are implementing it. He's talking more about the contractor, right? Or the architect. Yeah. One who's in charge of it all. Yeah. He's like a commander. Very similar. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. In the construction of houses, choices of wood is made straight, unknotted timber of good appearance is used for the revealed pillars. Straight timber with a small defect is used for the inner pillars. Timber of the finest appearance, even if a little weak, is used for the thresholds, lintels, doors, and sliding doors, and so on. Good strong timber, though it be gnarled. I don't know how.
Gnarled.
Gnarled.
Just
Yes,
gnarled.
gnarled.
The silent
Okay.
G. Yeah.
Gnarled and knotted can always be used discreetly in construction. Timber,
I
which
think
is
it should
weak.
be pronounced as gnarled because it's
Yeah.
gnarly, but it's lost that. It's just silent now. So, yeah.
Yes. Okay. Timber which is weak or knotted throughout should be used scaffoldingly
Yeah.
and no, not lingly. Okay. Scaffolding. Scaffolding.
Yeah, scaffolding. Yeah.
Yeah, and later for firewood. The foreman carpenter allots his men work according to their ability. Floor layers, makers of sliding doors, threshold and lintels, ceilings and so on. Those of poor ability lay the floor joists, and those of lesser ability carve wedges and do such miscellaneous work. If the foreman knows and deploy his men well, the finished work will be good. The foreman should,
Now, this is an important point here. Sorry, Binam.
yes,
When we look at back at history, we tend to gauge people according to our standards today of sophistication, right? And we see them as being without electricity in these times, and we assume they are unsophisticated and somewhat primitive because of that. Don't make that
mm,
mistake. Look at the sophistication. And this is just Musashi talking about this, right? He's not even a
mm,
carpenter or a foreman carpenter, but he knows
yes,
about this stuff, right? And when you go this, I mean, all the things have names and terms, and you look at the complexity of architecture and building, and you see the sophistication involved. And you had specialists, right? Look, he's talking about
yes,
somebody who specifically just works on sliding doors or whatever, right? So there was
yes,
great sophistication, and you see it especially in Europe with the construction of cathedrals. You see it with the Romans. Their
yes,
road construction, those roads still stand today. They're still in use
yes,
today, some of them,
yes,
right?
yes, yes,
I mean, it's just incredible. Oh, yeah.
yes,
The power of compound, in other words, we forget that, and the
yes,
power of collaboration. Yeah.
yes. The foreman should take into account the abilities and limitations of his men. circulating among them and asking nothing unreasonable. You should know their morale and spirit, and encourage them when necessary. This is the same as the principle of the strategy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right? It's strategic to encourage the morale and spirit and encourage them.
Yes.
That's part of your strategy. No?
Yes. Okay. So can we stop here and start
Oh,
on
yeah.
the way of a strategy from tomorrow?
Yes. Yes. Let's do that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Wonderful, Beena. We're on page 42, the way of strategy. I'll just leave the
Yes.
window open, but in case the computer reboots unexpectedly.
Yes. Yes. And we are at the way of strategy after
Yeah.
carpentry. This is really profound, Syl. And just to
Yeah.
share, I encapsulated to take away on that I'm learning to see the goodness first, of course, the intent to goodness, what Musashi was
The
doing
mourners.
at that
Yeah.
time, and also to see things in their appropriate context, which is so
Yeah.
crucial.
Yes.
It
Yes.
is also it also applies to your parents when
Yeah.
they were learning things and they learned things. Try to understand in that context. At that time,
Yeah.
the exposure, the available awareness, and
Yeah.
also the cultural conditioning and all sort of things.
Yeah.
You will see a lot because with their innate goodness, they are trying their best to provide you absolute good, which might not be nice
Yeah.
sometimes, which
Yeah.
might not be appropriate at some time. Of course, they need to learn their things, but we also need to learn our things.
Right.
Whatever they have been doing, they were also young like us at that time.
Oh, yeah.
And as nincompoop as we are, as foolish as we are, as
Absolutely.
afraid as we are.
And it's useful. Now, many people grow up with, today you grow up with videos and you see pictures and all this, right? But still, even for most people today, their parents weren't around at the time of Facebook. No? And even
Yes.
Facebook, the stuff tends to go away that you posted long ago. Right? This happened with a participant. They were having problem with their parent, right?
Yes.
Long-standing issues, and the parent didn't treat them very well. So I recommended they go and look up photos of their parent at the time when they were born. Right, the image we
Yes.
have as children of our parents is they big and huge and sensible and all of this stuff, right? And they have a larger than life image in the mind of a child, at least for most
Exactly.
children. But when the participant saw the image of her mother, it completely broke everything because she saw the mother as being somebody lost, somebody ignorant, somebody who didn't know.
Yes.
And she realized that the me of now is what's way more than my mother was then, not even close. So it changed her entire perspective on her mother.
Yes.
So yeah, be aware.
Yes.
Look at your parents in context. They were nincompoops back then. Yes, that's it. Simple as that, really, in general, at least. Yeah, and not always, of course, but in
Yeah.
general. So yeah, to this, the other point about
Yes.
what we're doing here is to be aware that people make this great fuss about ancient texts and all this, and it's like they have this. There's a sort of an idea that runs throughout. You can see it on the internet and in spiritual communities, like the ancients knew it all. They had it all figured out. They didn't. Sorry, they didn't. Yes, it seems like it because in modern times that type of thinking has fallen out of favor, right? Whereas, especially in times like in ancient Greece, this was popular and it was a thing, it was a culture. But also, we're seeing people like Musashi in isolation. He was an exception. In our world today, in the last couple of decades, there are plenty Musashis, but because there's so much stuff being published, they go unnoticed. Yeah. In those days, to publish something was a major deal, major undertaking. There are no printing presses. It's all done by hand. You have to have copies made by hand. It's a major, major undertaking. So there are relatively few people making and creating and writing books. So these things stand out, right? Context again, understanding context. Life before printing presses was like a huge difference. Even before Amazon, Amazon changed publishing profoundly. Yes, because when
Yes.
Amazon came along, they gave you two things that they did. One is more recent than the other, but first when they did this, you could publish your book as an ebook, right? Which means everybody
Yes.
had access to it. But you could do this yourself as an individual, right? Whereas before that, you had to go through the traditional publishers, which was a big rigmarole. You need to get an agent, and first you had to write submissions to the agent to say, "Take me on as a client." Then the agent petitions the publishing house, and maybe if you're lucky, you get published, right? And it's the chances of getting published are like 1 in 100,000. It's really ridiculous, right? Very small chances and to even be so nowadays with the there's the big four traditional publishers that are still left. You either need to be a celebrity to get published or have some other focus, that sets you apart and be special, or already have been an established writer. There's so many people who want to be, and there's so many celebrities that they can choose from to publish their work. They don't even bother really. Right? So it's a different deal. But then Amazon came along and said, "Well, we'll publish your book online. Okay, it's not printed, but if your book is popular, you can go to a printer and publish it yourself and sell it if you want to." Okay, right? And then Barnes and Noble came and they had uh, online and physical bookstores, and also so you could have it both ways. But then um, uh, publish on print on demand came along, right? They developed this technology to print your book on demand, which is before you had to print like a minimum of 100 or probably even 1,000 copies in order to get the book to be cost effective for you to sell it yourself. And I've met authors. I played golf with a guy, wrote a cool little novel, but it didn't go anywhere. And he would ride around with a trunk full of books, and he'd give them away or sell them. And it's very common. It's even a meme in a way. Yeah? And this idea of the authors driving around with a trunk full of books, it literally does happen, or they got the books sitting in their garage, right? Because they had to put that big order and they never sold. But print on demand means that I can order and I don't have to order 1,000 books. It just gets printed on demand. It's a technology that does it as you. It's really fascinating. People don't realize this. When you buy a paperback, typically on Amazon, right? It's not a whole bunch sitting in the warehouse. It gets sent to the printer and they print it right there and bind it and everything, and off it goes. Fantastic technology. So today to print a book is relatively easy, but when I was a young man, or even 10, well, maybe it's 10 years already now, I don't know, but 20 years ago, certainly, this was not available, right? Printing was a big deal. So I'm making the point. In history, those who did write and did publish books, they stand out. Yes, so we tend to give them more prominence. But when we say the ancients, typically these are a few isolated individuals, like the Greeks. They didn't all exist at the same time. I mean, the time between Socrates and Plato, who were contemporaries, yes, and Homer is ages, right? If not, centuries. So this is it's a very big difference. We have to understand that we lump them all together, but at those times they weren't together, right? So this thing of the ancients having all the answers, no, they had some profound ideas, but they're profound ideas all throughout history. Those have just stuck around because they were profound. It's not like the culture then was profound. Absolutely not. If it really was, then you would see more remnants of it, which we don't see. Yeah. I mean, like the Greeks, for all of that Greek culture that we see through those writings in that age, it's a small part of general Greek culture. Not only that, we get democracy from that time, this idea, but they weren't all that in favor of democracy, by the way. And it was a very limited democracy, very limited franchise. You had to own property and you had to be a man.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Yes.
limited, very limited. And they just took this
Yes.
misogyny for granted and even questioned it. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
No.
So we might get digress a bit here, but
Yeah.
keeping
Yeah.
it
But a
uh,
contextual
the con.
appreciation, that's the point here.
Yes. 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 And okay. Thank you so much, Syl, for sharing, and thank you everyone who is watching us live and will watch us recorded on YouTube and Substack. Please do comment, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you are going to help to promote the Moreness culture. Okay, Moreness culture, not the Moreness culture. And also
Yeah.
you are going to help and train your algorithm to give you more like this. And this is a great help. And this is also a great need for the future. What you want to learn, what you want to know more about, what you really feel
Yeah.
interested in. This is how you are providing data to the next AI dominated world. This is how it is going to be.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
please do try to provide precise data, what you really want to see more of it.
Oh
This
yeah.
is how you are going to do that. And this is wonderful. Thank you so much, Syl, for sharing such in such detail, because this is very valuable and precious that you are reading a book, but you are
Fun
also
stuff.
having a context, yes, and details about
Yeah.
how and what they were trying to share. Because again, it is not a bad thing, but of course we are living in a way much sophisticated world now. So whatever they were sharing, it was good and profound, but yes, because we are so accustomed and used to with the details and preciseness and sophistication, so we feel that okay, yes, it was lacking there. And having someone who can provide us context and details
Yeah.
is such a blessing right now. I really feel that. Thank you so
Oh
much for
yeah.
doing so.
Oh yeah.
Thank
Pleasure.
you so much,
Pleasure.
Sil,
Pleasure.
and see you
All right.
guys
See you all tomorrow.
tomorrow
One
with more
last
of
question before I
Musashi.
go, Beena. Do I look different from yesterday?
Yes, definitely.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, sir.
All right. All
Okay.
right. Brilliant.
Yes.
Brilliant.
You have
Brilliant.
you have
Bye bye,
things to take
everybody.
care
See you
of.
tomorrow. See you tomorrow. Fun stuff. Fun
Yes.
stuff. All
Yes.
right. End meeting.